And so you are, in a sense, at this point, also victims of this same theory of enrichment or seeming enrichment through impoverishment and indebtedness, especially a theory that puts more and more and more of the world's poor in hoc to global credit markets. You need to understand that 80% of, or 75% of all university families make use of the $100,000 line of credit, at least some of it. You also need to understand that a third of all undergraduates who borrow for higher education leave with the debt and no degrees. How is this global scam applicable here? UC's financial plan was simply based on the idea that the willingness to take on debt is a way to raise revenues faster because it grows faster than the public's willingness to take on taxes. This is an example of a national and a global problem. But to say that it's an example of a problem that exists everywhere is not to say that it can't be solved here. California higher education is, for many reasons, a good place to illustrate what's wrong with this theory, and a good place to start solving the problem. So here's the deal. Students get to live on debt, a $100,000 line of credit while in school, as the school takes an increasing share of the students' borrowing. And as every term in school puts you deeper in debt, you can't withdraw, you can't mobilize, you can't go on strike without accruing interest and having to make payments. So that's the real material source of their control, is that they let you borrow until they kick you out, and if they kick you out, you're in debt. Their whole financial plan, in the absence of a usable endowment, is to allow more and more students to run up more and more debt, to avoid being left behind, even as the chance of getting ahead, of getting in that top 1%, diminishes. But without the credit line, the whole house of cards falls down. And guess what happened in 2008, 2009? The whole house of cards fell down. What we have at the moment is a UC that has lost its principles and lost its way. The theory that I presented to you is the only theory they've got. They have been maneuvering to put that theory in place for 5 years while I was on the budget committee before 2003. And every single piece of that theory has now fallen apart, except for the fact that UC is not willing to go back to the drawing boards and promise to reverse things that the state will. So you should understand this. You should understand this. You should understand that what they are saying as an inevitable fact, costs are going up, the state won't pay. If the state won't pay, we are being forced to raise tuition, is exactly the reverse of what's going on. They're raising tuition because they can, and because they can, they'll raise costs. And because of the reasons that they're giving to raise tuition, taxpayers won't pay. That's what's happening. So realize this. Realize that this is the product of a particular historical conjuncture, the way the world looked between 1998 and 2003. And that the entire theory fell apart between 2003 and 2008. And so you need to understand several things. First, how fragile this all is. It's dependent on the growth of private credit markets, which grow because trade surpluses are reinvested in the U.S. by China and other countries. You should realize how exploitative it all is. Almost all university growth, almost all of the activities of the university are directly or indirectly financed on your backs. the only dependable source of revenue growth in universities is enrollment-based revenue. And the only area of cost cutting in universities that is serious, visible, and relentless is cuts in the cost per credit hour, cuts in the cost of instruction. In other words, the university grows and its costs grow because it is using enrollment-based growth to subsidize non-instructional activity. Finally, understanding how fragile it is, understanding how exploitative it is, you also need to understand how cynical it is. It's designed to make you feel rich in your high-spending student years by putting easy money in your pocket while impoverishing you long-term, and then to make you feel foolish for having borrowed so much. You see leadership now collude with the political leaders in Sacramento to blame the taxpayer who feels he's falling behind for refusing to subsidize this scam. This scam that presupposes that California's system of public higher education has really lost its way, and that it is no longer a force for greater equality in the state. A public higher education does not need to drive inequality. It can drive equality. It can drive equality partly because it can be free. It can drive equality partly because it can be good. Education is more valuable to people who are educated the more people who are educated. It's one of those goods that becomes better when it's shared. And it can drive equality if it's funded by progressive taxation, because the taxation system can drive equality. So the real question is not whether higher education can drive social equality. It's whether UC can be made to shift from a theory that makes it want to privatize by financializing your anxiety about a growing income gap in the state to a theory where UC, again, simultaneously reforms itself. And in return, but only in return, demands restored funding under the master plan. My real message then is that you should persist, that you should not give up, that this is not a moment in which all is lost, this is a moment that is ripe for change. You, the student and faculty and staff movement, are perfectly positioned to make this issue the poster child with what's wrong nationally with the turn away from tax-funded public goods toward debt financing. You should be able to say that that theory assumes a society that is growing ever more equal and contributes to making it so, and that to reverse this trend, we must be voices for higher education. We must march against them and in favor of greater equality, rather than simply price protesters demanding our own privilege. We must, in other words, as a movement, present a vision that the UC leadership clearly has not. What is this vision? Well, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the vision that UC left behind. UC's leaders need to articulate the value of a public university as Clark Kerr once did. They need to say, as Clark Kerr once did, and as most Californians still somewhere in their mind still think, a great public education is even greater than a great private education because it's public.